All right, welcome to the Daily Rep Show. I am your host, Eric Procknell, and I have a very special show that I'm bringing you. A lot of you heard the trailer for it. I am super excited. I've taken a few deep breaths to make sure that I've calmed myself down and prepared myself for this man that I have in front of you and brought you, because I feel as if he has a ton of valuable information, especially in this time of stress, negativity, and mental health. So we know the Daily Reps podcast is designed of bringing guests to the show that are experts in the field of health and fitness. And we all know health is mental health, social health, physical health, emotional, occupational, all those things. And I really feel that our guest today is, the main focus will be mental health, but I think he encompasses and will be able to hit on all those aspects and how to obtain those. And he's a good friend of mine. He's a life coach, a husband, and a father. So a very, very busy man, straight out of Washington, D.C., a good friend of mine, Andrew Della Rocca. Welcome to the show, bud.
Thanks, Eric. It's good to be here.
Man, I'm so happy to get. I had to go get a good workout. I think I was telling people this before in the little prep show that I had before here, because I'm so excited to have you on the show, man. And I know how I am, and I get a little bit too excited, and I just wanted to calm myself down and make sure that I don't cut you off at all and get what the people really need. And sure. Andy has started his own life coaching, which is Manifestara. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure that I said that right. And part of the life coaching is he works for as one-on-one individuals, but also I
do mental fitness training. Yeah.
Right. And then and then a little bit about what people might not know, Andy, is working for businesses. And some people might think, what can a life coach do for a business? So I just want you to talk a little bit about Manifestara and that aspect of one-on-one coaching compared to corporations, and what you can do as a coach for both of those.
Yeah, sure. Well, Manifestara is just it's a small organization that I started. Me and my wife, we both are life and leadership and business coaches, but primarily life coaches, right? And we began it with the intention of helping people who are just very, very busy and feeling kind of overloaded by the weight and the stress of life, and in particular, people who are running small to medium-sized businesses and who are just have gotten so caught up in managing their day-to-day tasks that they may end up forgetting about the big picture. And what we try to do is we kind of try to reconnect people with like this kind of larger vision and what it is that they want next, and then work with them to make sure that they are spending enough time focusing on the big picture, not just managing the small tasks. So to speak to, how that helps a small business, for example, my clients, they've come in inspired. They started something that inspired them. They built something up. They start hiring employees, and then next thing you know, life, I think this happens to a lot of us, life kind of just starts taking over. And then that thing that you created, that you were so enthusiastic about, becomes something that you're now just kind of managing, right? Your day-to-day is like filled with tasks. And how do I get through this day? And how do I get through these tasks? And so what I do is when I start working with my clients, I try to reconnect them with, okay, well, what's next? What is it that you really want to create from here? Okay, you've created this wonderful thing, but what's the next thing that you want to create? Is it that you want to grow this business? Is it that you want greater peace of mind? Do you want to kind of have a business running in such a way that you have more time? and you can spend more time with your family or with your children. I mean, what is it? And so we kind of, we dig down and we discover what that is. And then I work with them throughout the course of 6 months or a year to help them get to that point that they defined. So it is life coaching. A lot of the stuff is focused on business, where it is they want to take the business, the people in their business, but it's also a lot of relationship work. So everything from relationships within the organization to relationships at home. And that's where I find a lot of people find a lot of meaning, is in, the people around them, and having, supporting the people around them and making sure that the people around them are productive and good, and they feel better about themselves.
Right. So it sounds like to me that it's almost like you're kind of re-inspiring them, re-motivating them, and thus, kind of setting them down the path of being more productive. And to hear you talking about time, we all, and a lot of people don't realize just how valuable time is. I guess when you get older, but, and how to manage that time. So, it's great to hear you talk about that, because, that was the first thing I was kind of, well, businesses, why would they, for a life coach, but, and if you think about when it comes to coaching, there's so many avenues for that. And, one aspect that always comes to mind about life coaching is the one-on-one coaching of personal life.
Right. Yeah.
And I stated that Andy is my friend. We've known each other since college. And it's crazy because in some of the old podcasts I was talking to friends of where I was had met these people, and it just was like an instant click. And if I remember, so in college, that was like the first night we hung out, and I was just like, man, there's something about Andy, his energy, that I was like, hey, let's be, and we ended up being roommates. And it was just your personality, your drive, it just comes out, and anybody that knows Andy can say the exact same thing. And so it's great to see you, starting this and doing well. And I want to let people know doing well means, while Andy was going through, so educating himself, and it's not like Andy just was like, I read a couple books, you know what, I'm going to be a life coach. And, I've had many experiences. No, you went and got certified, went through very extensive training to get through that.
I can speak to that if you want. And
I would, and then I'll go back to letting them know, how you helped me personally.
Yeah, sure. I guess, how did I get into life coaching? I don't know if you want the abbreviated version or the extended version, but I was, as you know, I lived in Brazil for a number of years. So I was in Brazil. I was working as a teacher, and is the extended version okay?
I want the nitty and gritty. I want the secrets.
All right.
That's what this show's all about, Andy.
Yeah. So I was in Brazil, and I lived in Brazil for about 6 years, and my daughter was Brazilian, and I was there for really trying to kind of I was supporting her and supporting her mother. And at one point, I decided I had to come back to the United States. Not because I didn't love Brazil, but I wasn't building, like I was struggling, right, when I was down there. And I came back to the US, and suddenly I felt as though, okay, I feel a fish out of water. Like, what am I doing here? I felt like I was different. I was seeing things differently, and I didn't know what path to go in. So I just I was in Washington, D.C., and so I just followed like the path that seemed like the reasonable path, right? Which was, well, first getting a nice 9-to-5 job, right? So I had been teaching in Brazil. So I said, okay, I'm going to go teach at the public schools. I think a part of that was very inspiring to me, because, it was a way to contribute to the community. But it certainly wasn't my dream. And so I knew, all right, I'll return to I'll return to teaching. I'll go to the public schools, and then I'll go and get my master's degree, right? Because I'm here in Washington, D.C., and everybody, you know, it seems like everybody has 2-3 master's degrees. So it's like, I have to get a master's degree, right? And I was just kind of following this flow, not really knowing what my direction was, which I think kind of has inspired me into the profession I'm in now, because I help other people not drift, right? And so I was drifting. And I found a program that was close to me in conflict analysis and resolution. And even though I knew I was going back for a master's for professional reasons, I also knew that if I was going to spend a lot of time looking at something, I wanted it to be truly fascinating. And there happened to be a university around the corner that has the first college devoted completely to conflict analysis and resolution. I said, that sounds fascinating. I'm going to take that program. And so I went through 2 years studying kind of why and how people engage in conflict and why societies engage in conflict. And in that program, I took a course called conflict coaching. And that introduced me to this idea that, wow, you can make a living by helping people, you know, get through hard times or transform something which seems intractable into something beautiful, right? And that was the first spark. So after I finished my graduate program, I said, well, how can I learn how to do this? And how can I learn how to do this competently? And I ended up going to a school called CTI, Coaches Training Institute. Now it's called the Coactive Institute. And it was a program of about a year and a half, you know, where we had these wonderful transformative experiences. I would recommend it to anybody. Live experiences, maybe 5 weekends over the course of the first 6 months. And then we had to go through our certification process, which involved having a number of clients and learning how to coach. So that was how I got into it, right? I went through the Coaches Training Institute after my graduate program. And after that, I said, you know what? This is what I want to go all in. And I left teaching and started the practice. So I've been at it for about a year and a half now. It's been good.
So, I mean, to hear you talk about conflict resolution and going through that, I mean, just in my mind, I'm thinking, what just a great, thing besides the life coaching, because we know that, and just let alone in everybody's life, but in anybody's job and business, there's always the conflict, there's always the drama, right? And so, man, if you could get somebody to come in and smooth that out, I mean, you know, that would be just, and if you think about it, like, you know, somebody going to work and if they hate that and they're thinking about that all day, of the effects of productivity and that, but, you know, how nice it would be to have where you're going to a place that is conflict free, is drama free. And so, you know, while you were going through that, if I'm not mistaken, Andy, you had so many hours that you had to do, right, where that you had to log in with you know, people, which was actually me. So I remember we got back together. You know, it was wonderful. We've always been in touch, you know, but once you were in Brazil and stuff, and, you know, we kind of kept in touch and kept meeting up. And when we got back in touch, and it's funny how things work out. And I'm a big believer in synchronicities, and when people come back in your life, and it's almost was made me think about, like, maybe that's the part of the reason why me and you were connected right off the bat, because you really did help me a lot. So when I kind of moved out back after taking care of my parents, and I ended up moving away from them, and they were sick, and I fell into basically one of the hardest times of my life, and was kind of going down a downward spiral. And you had contacted me and offered that. And I didn't even mention to you that I was going through that. And you were like, you know, hey, I need these hours. And I've always been one to be like, hey, and find the value and somebody that knows more than me, or that maybe could say something that could help. And, you know, and you took, and basically through those conversations, you know, you were a big part of kind of turning my whole mindset and focus, and turning the worst situation into what I call is my blessing.
Yeah, yeah.
It really has, and if people look at, and life throws you those hard times, you either let them pull you down or you rise above it. And one thing that you said to me that you connected to me was about, and a lot of people might know about, the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
brought that up, and you were
Yeah.
like, hey, you're either going to be, or put the blame on somebody else, or take it in as yourself as being the hero and coming out of it as a better
Yeah.
person. And at that time, I kind of got away from yoga and meditation, which I knew was so good for me. And I don't know why I let it go, but I had started in it. And one of our guests that I had on there, and I talked this to Steve, Nama Steve, that we had on the show, about starting my own yoga practice, and I got back into it. And of course,
Yeah.
teaching it, it made me be like, all right, I got to really be doing this. I got to walk the walk. And that's always been one thing that drives me, because I don't want to be just the guy that just is talking shit.
Yeah.
You know,
It was such, I remember, I mean, it was, well, I mean, you've never been just that guy. I mean, I remember that, right? You've always been, if I could, I would say, to use a cliche, I guess, a man of action. I mean, you've always been very active. And that was something I think that I admired about you when we were in university together. But yeah, absolutely. I want to speak about the hero's journey, which is, you know, a way of looking at what's happening in one's life. What's really essential there was assuming, by accepting like that role, right, that of responsibility, versus dishing it off to whatever the circumstance is that seems so insurmountable. But by pulling it in and taking total responsibility for your life, you step into a space of choice and agency, right? It's like, okay, wait, I can make choices now, you know? And that's something I think it's so important, because it's so easy for us to get bogged down, right? And forget that we don't, if we are bogged down, that too is a choice, right? It's full of choices. And you went right, I mean, right, like, of course there was some time, there's a period of struggle, but soon after it was like, okay. And then you just started doing all this amazing stuff. And it's just been great to watch. And here we are today.
Yeah. And so, and then through that, you know, and then Andy went and got certified, but, you know, that always stuck with me. And, you know, I've heard that before. Like, I'm one to always, like, I wake up in the morning, I'm constantly on YouTube videos of watching, and Stephen Hubbard, we just talked about this, like, guys like, you know, oh God, who is he talking about on there? Tony Robbins. I like David Goggins, of people that just get you inspired and say those things that, and, you know, one of them talk about, there's a lot of stuff on the hero's journey, and, you know, and they were talking about, you know, people watch a movie and they're really drawn into a movie where it's somebody that's been in a terrible situation, but they come out the hero, right? They've come out good at the end. They don't want to, right? And so people are inspired by that. And that's one of the things that I like to, as a teacher, in teaching, you know, students that I had that come from bad backgrounds. And I try to tell them that, you know, do you want to be that person that, you know, are just inspired just from your presence? They know where you've been, and, you know, that can be liberating of itself. But what you said there to me was, and it's very difficult, and I'm sure you agree with that, where you have to you're like looking at yourself and taking the blame, kind of, right?
Yeah.
You know, and that's a very hard thing to do. And I was like, you know, because at that time I really was dumping it off on the circumstance and other people, and you caught me out. You called me out on it, And once you said that, like I jotted stuff down, you know, in my notes. And I think that, as soon as I knew I had Andy, I'm ready. I don't want to miss anything. So, you know, as soon as you said that,
Although I will have to, I do want to interject here for a
please
second
do.
because yes, I do have some nuggets every now and again. Okay, but you know, a lot of the stuff that came out of you, right? Because a lot of the work that I do, and as you know, is really just asking very direct questions, you know, and it's like, and it's not that you know, I think coaching is not, the coach is not the expert in the, you know, in this journey, right? The client is the experts. The only thing, like when I said that hero thing or that responsibility thing, it was because I kind of sensed it because of the things that you were telling me, right? But most of what we came up with, most of the ideas, almost all of the ideas that we actually came up with came out of you, right? Because you know what's going on with you better than anybody. And that's why when I'm linked up with someone, let's say who's in charge of an organization or is in an industry that I am not the expert in, that I do not have any experience in, coaching is still effective because someone's going to usually take a piece of advice and it won't have the same impact if they act on it as it would if the idea came from deep within themselves, right? When they get the insight and they come up with the idea, you know, maybe I'm asking them questions and giving them space, but when they come up with the idea, that's the right idea because they know.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, it's almost like a light bulb going off, and you know, to hear you say that, and the conversations with my father. My father is a Vietnam vet, suffers from PTSD, and you just to take it from there. And he would always tell me, because you know, me going through hard times with my father, what we realized that one of the best things we could do is to talk about it, and it's very difficult. And especially I think men are willing to be like, I don't need to get into that, but it really opened us up to that. And my father he would say that, you know, the best thing about his therapists or stuff would be because they would, exactly like what you said, was kind of, I want to say kind of point you in the right direction, but lead you to, like what you said, where you can connect with it with yourself, where, because if, you know, giving suggestions to people is one thing, but and like, I love what you said there, because it was, when I brought it out on myself, it just connected a lot more with me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that aha moment, that light bulb going off. And it really was, you know, super beneficial. I mean, just those few minutes that I had with you, so valuable. And it's just to hear you say that, and then having my father say that, of, you know, you're not really just kind of just telling people what they do. You're extremely good at listening to people, and then kind of picking up what they're saying, like you had told me about that. And then just kind of giving like these subtle suggestions of, you know, hey, think about it this way or that, you know, and then having them connect with it. And it really is very powerful. And, you know, we've talked about it on the show with every one of my guests so far, of being mindful of catching those things, of taking the time to do that. And a lot of people don't. They go through hard times and it just kind of carries them away, where
Yeah.
like these corporations, they're so caught up in it, and they're not taking that time to kind of, you know, be mindful of those, or, hey, is this something I do? Am I still excited about this? And what can get me going? And so you could see where that is super beneficial for somebody like you that has that knowledge and education of it to lead those people that way, man. So, I mean, what a great advice right there. And
It's there's I mean, as you speak and as I listen to you, it's, I think about the process, right? Because the work of coaching is a process. And it's really about slowing down. I mean, so many people think it's about speeding up. And I find that, and I'm not claiming to be the authority on anything, but I'm just, what I've found with like the work with my clients is if we stay at that same rhythm, that same pace, that frenetic pace, right? The same decisions are made, the same problems are created, right? The same kind of, like, nothing transforms, nothing changes. But when just a chance to kind of slow down for a moment, right? Once a week or twice a week really helps you kind of hear what's happening deep inside, right? Because we're running on autopilot half the time.
Yeah.
And people will go through their entire lives on autopilot, and not, like, intellectually they might do some reflection, right? They might use their rational brain. They might pause for a second. Let me solve this problem, and then they're sitting in a, and it's you can see the tension, because
Right.
all the energy is in this one space, right? That's this rational kind of, oh, I'm gonna figure this out. Okay, that's a form of slowing down, sure, but there's like this. That's not the same thing as taking a breath and slowing down and being able to kind of really just explore. Because you never see an explorer like this. You know what I'm saying? You don't.
Right.
Right? An explorer is like, wow, like when, that I love being abroad. I've had a great time going abroad a few times, and it's always like, ooh, I like to take that street. Ooh, look at that street. Let's go down there. Like, just curious and open, right? But that takes time. That takes a moment of slowing down and permission, I guess we could say, And so it's like it's giving yourself permission to tone it down a little bit.
Right.
Will really get you much further.
And to hear you talk about that, it kind of, I started thinking about yoga and meditation and mindfulness and stuff like that, of taking that time to slow down. I don't, talking with people that are close to me that I know that are very anxious, and I will ask them, even when you're taking a walk, are you being like, oh, look at that beautiful sunset, or look how nice the weather is and the trees, and that person told me, no, I'm up here, and I'm like, man, you're kind of going through life, you're missing out on all of that, and just being in your head and not being in the moment. And we talked about this, about the power of meditation and slowing down, and what yoga and Tai Chi and those practices have to offer, because they are practices that kind of carry on in your life. And the more you do it, you do then throughout the day take more and more of that time to relax and catch those things of, oh my God, why am I here and not looking at that beautiful sunset? Or, why am I, not where I want to be in my job? So, again, of you just saying the same kind of things that these other successful people were talking about, and then that also leads me to the program that you took us through. So, I just went through. Was it 8 weeks, Andy?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, 8 weeks. 8 weeks.
An 8-week program where it was mental training. I'll explain, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about it. Was and a group of close friends of ours went through it at the same time. So it was, not just me, but it really was a lot of taking moments throughout the day, and just like you would practice anything like yoga or working out, but training the mind
Yeah.
to slow down.
Yeah.
And and that's why I really, besides the point of I was talking about of Andy helping me as a one-on-one coach, but this really has and just kind of launched me on the way, because it really reaffirmed of the of how valuable yoga and slowing down and meditation really has, and I'm never going to take that break from it,
Yeah.
and keep it my attention on it. And
Yeah.
it was called a positive intelligence. Um,
Mental
and
fitness training. Yeah.
yeah, and so both. I think one of the things that we found out, Andy, I think both of us were what they call a hyperachiever, right?
Yeah. 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 Oh,
So
yeah. Let's talk about that, man.
yeah,
Yeah. Talk
so
about it. Yeah.
so so both of us are, and I'm sure anybody that knows us probably can just tell that, are really um, accomplishment type, goal oriented type people, and
Mhm.
basically base the quality of our life on the accomplishments that we're getting. Whereas if you really look at that, and I'll let you explain this a little bit
Mhm.
more,
Yeah.
it can hinder us. And people are like, well, how does that hinder you? And through the program, it let me really see that, hey, that is my number one thing that's slowing me down. Because if
Yeah.
I'm not putting myself to these standards or at this level, um, it brings us down.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. And so the positive intelligence, we also, let me back up just a little bit. We call it, another term is like mental fitness training. And we really use that. It comes from, it comes out of Stanford. This guy, Shirzad Shamin, wrote the book Positive Intelligence. He's a coach. And it's been used to train world-class athletes. It's been used to train CEOs throughout the world, this training program. And it's the idea is like, you, with physical fitness, it is very difficult to climb a steep hill without feeling physical stress if you are not physically fit, right? And so you have to do some exercises in order to be able to, conquer steeper and steeper hills. And the same is really very, very true if we use the hill as a metaphor for life, with mental fitness. So the idea is that if you are not mentally fit, then life's smaller challenges are going to cause you mental stress, anxiety, overwhelm, or whatnot. But if you train your mental fitness, then you will be able to tackle and handle the bigger and bigger and bigger challenges of life. And so this is a deliberate program which uses exercises, mental exercises, akin to meditation or mindfulness, but that also include visualization, that include just what we call self-command throughout the day. 2 minutes here, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes there, 2 minutes there. So you're constantly checking in with this part of yourself, which is more expansive, more creative, and more relaxed, and activating a part of your nervous system, a part of your intelligence that, we in American society often suppress. And so a lot of us are driven by what we would call, you were speaking about the hyperachiever, right? So that's just a name for a saboteur, right? So a lot of us are driven, all of us are driven to some extent, but what we would call our saboteurs. And a saboteur is just a name, a way to personify the mental process of handling a challenge that we perceive as a threat, as a bad thing. So when we make a judgment like, oh, this is not good, this has to be fixed, right? We start operating from the part of our brain that perceives threats, okay? And when we slow down and we stop thinking of life or a situation or a person or our own kind of habits as threatening, we can shift into a different part of our nervous system and start approaching things as gifts and opportunities, right? So that's kind of like, that's the shift. So the hyperachiever is a style of the part of our brain that the threat response, because the belief for the hyperachiever is that if this goal is not reached, if this accolade is not received, if recognition, external recognition from others does not come, then there's something wrong, right? That's our fuel, right? Like, ooh, then something's going to collapse, right? Now that's very extreme, right? But at the core, that's the hyperachiever. The thing about it though is like all of these things come from our strengths, right? So the hyperachiever is a false promise. It says, if you achieve this, you will be fulfilled and happy, right? And that's the false promise. But it comes from a strength, and the strengths that you and I both have we are driven, right? So as long as we're not in the saboteur mode of it, the hyperachiever, and we're more in this other mode, what we would call the sage or the sage achiever mode, where we are, yes, driven, but we're also clear and calm and focused and in flow, that's great. But how much of our time are we spending in the saboteur, the threat mode, where it's the hyperachiever? And, I noticed as I do this program, because, all of us are dealing with saboteurs, spending some time in saboteur, some time in sage, that when I am about to perform, and some of you may be familiar with this, just before the performance, there's this feeling, right? Almost an anxiety, almost like people would call it the butterflies, right? And I started getting really in tune to it before. And my performances are often coaching sessions, right? It's like there's a moment just before where I'm about to connect with somebody, where there's like a moment of agitation, and then I have to make sure I kind of get centered. And I started paying attention to that moment of agitation. And I realized that it was like this, it felt like a claw, gripping like in my chest, right? And this is we're not trained to kind of like pay attention to these sensations, right? We're trained to ignore them. But I'm like, wow, that's my hyperachiever saboteur. And look, it's like a claw here, and I just started kind of like sitting with it and just kind of getting to know it and letting that claw kind of like ease up. Now I think I might be kind of meandering a little bit, but the purpose of kind of what I'm explaining is because how often are we going through life with a claw here or here or here, or here or here, right? And we just live with it. We think that's driving us. And it's that negative physical sensation that we get.
Right. That
is telling us. Like if we slow down, we can become aware of it. Oh yeah, that's pushing me, that's telling me a lie. It's pushing me in this wrong direction. Okay? And I might have all the success in the world. Like some people are driven to become the president of the United States, being pushed by their saboteurs. But where's like the fulfillment and the joy and the aliveness, it gets left behind.
And so Andy, like now, and this is gonna kind of lead me to a point, when you prior to since you've been noticing that and you have put your attention on how that feels, do you feel like that claw is kind of let up? It's less
strong
that's
a good question. Yeah.
As it has been when you first noticed it, right?
Yeah, I think it's like it's when you resist it, right? Like we get into when you resist it, it's not gonna go away. It's like you push it when you push against someone and they're pushing you back, right? So like the resistance itself. So what happens is when someone's feeling stressed out, they start trying to battle with the stress. They're like they become um, they say, oh, I wish this would go away, or this is, oh man, I hope I'm not feeling like this when I start, and oh
Right.
no, and I'm feeling nervous, and look, I'm sweating, and and that resistance
I love that word, man.
keeps its power,
Yeah.
you know?
Or they suppress it, which what a lot of people do.
Yeah,
And and I know Andy's really, but like really starting to get into meditation. I know that's not like your main, but to hear you say that, and it really mirrors a lot of, if you listen to what people talk about meditation, and that, they catch that fear of being
yeah,
mindful of it. And instead of kind of fighting it, like you just stated, which makes it worse, because it's
yeah,
almost like they talk about clearing your mind. And when you're meditation, there's that transcendental meditation that, again, my friend was talking about, that we had on the show, of being able to clear your mind of all thought. And so if I was to give him the thought of a red dog, a red dog, a red dog, and then of fighting that, it kind of makes, then he's thinking of the red dog. And I've heard a lot of people talk about meditation of being like, as you witness something that you are uncomfortable with, it's like a cloud. You recognize it is there, but you're recognizing it's there. You're not resisting it so much as
yeah,
recognizing it and acknowledging it and having
yeah,
your attention on it and not suppressing it, which has the opposite effect of
mhm,
it being, and so then it lessens.
yeah, yeah,
So it's very interesting to hear you say that and talk about that, of then why people see that, of being mindful of meditation, of and those things that we talked about with Stephen and with yoga, and that, of letting it go, of, oh
mhm,
hey, there it is,
mhm.
and it's going to come and go.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
right, we know that we're going to have that day where we feel like shit, or we have that fear, we acknowledge it, and then just know it's going to have its time. And then the more and
yeah,
more we do that, and like you said, and so that's why I asked you that question, is that of you doing that, it's lessened. And it's because you took the time of being like, hey, why am I getting, and what really does that feel like? Oh, well, it's right here. And what does
yeah,
it
yeah,
feel like? It
yeah,
absolutely. So you like dove into it, where most people are
yeah,
like, I don't want to feel that. Hell no.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
go somewhere
exactly.
else, or put
Yeah.
my mind there. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. And then, you brought up another aspect. So the positive intelligence stuff, the name alone is like taking a negative and making it into a positive. And that's really kind of the nuts
Yeah.
and bolt of the program. And before I even did this program, like using that hero's journey that I just talked about, it
Yeah.
was you and yoga at the same time, of me being mindful of stuff that took that bad thing of mine, and you even had me focusing on what that felt like and
Yeah.
how it
Yeah.
made me sick. And I didn't want to, where you're like, where did you feel in that? I'm like, in my stomach, in my heart,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know? And man, it was an extremely uncomfortable feeling, but the more I did it and recognized it, and then it literally allowed me to take one of
Yeah.
the worst things that's ever happened in my life into, it's the best thing in my life.
Yeah.
Because it really did, it made me be like, man, holy cow, how strong of a person I am to overcome that. And the place, and literally in hell is where I was, in the worst, no family, no friends around me, the worst
Yeah.
place that I could possibly be, and showing me, it was basically showing me, hey man, look how strong you are. You got
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
that in the worst atmosphere, the worst thing you could
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And so, talk to us a little bit about, you had mentioned the sage. So
Mm.
the saboteur, and then, there's other things, like besides the hyperachiever, there's the
Mm.
controller, where somebody
Yeah.
wants to control everything.
Yeah.
There's other things besides that and it brought out on a lot of our friends different things, and to hear them talk about it, I was like, man, I would have never thought that,
Yeah.
But the sage aspect is almost like kind of like that hero of looking at it through a different lens, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the sage is a term. So we have the sage and the saboteur, right? And the saboteur is that threat response. And then the sage is the where you, it's the term that we use to describe the kind of more expansive, creative, joyful, focused you, right? And we call it the sage. It's not like we have multiple different saboteurs, but we call it the sage because, when you really dig it down, it's at its essence, it's your true self, right? So, and the sage doesn't see things in binary terms. It doesn't see things as, we try to say that the sage only sees gifts and opportunities. I mean, if you take it even further than that, it's the sage is just at one with experience. I mean, if you really want to break it down, so we call it like, Shazad calls it positive intelligence. The creator, he calls it positive intelligence, and it's an approach to, it's the ability to meet life's challenges from a positive rather than a negative mindset. When you really think about it, it's really just getting out of the negative mindset, because everything else we could say is positive, but it's just kind of being at one, right, with your experience. It's being in your experience, and that's okay. And we get caught up in with our saboteurs because we're projecting out to the future or regretting something in the past, right? And that's where our saboteurs kind of start pouncing, But the sage is different, right? The sage is, there's a story that he tells in our programs where there was like this golden Buddha statue, right? And I don't know if you remember this from the video. So in Thailand, there was this monastery, had this beautiful, it's the largest golden Buddha in the world. And this Burmese army, I think the Burmese army was invading. This was in maybe the 1800s. And they were a brutal army. And at the time they were killing everyone they were coming across, or as a war party. And so they had, the monks at this monastery had this golden Buddha statue, and they said, what are we going to do? And it's too heavy. We can't move it. We can't, we have to flee. And so what they did was they covered it in plaster. So then it looked like a plaster Buddha, it didn't look like this cheap kind of plaster thing. And then I think either the armor came and killed them, or they fled or whatnot. But anyways, that plaster Buddha sat there for over 100 years. And nobody knew that it was a golden Buddha, right? It was just this ugly kind of brown plaster on it. And then one day, one day, whoever was in the monastery, or they're like, we have to move this thing. And they went to go try to move it, wow, it was so heavy. And it chipped. And you see underneath the plaster, they see this gold, right? And so they pulled off all the plaster, and it's this gigantic piece of this golden Buddha. It was beautiful, right? And that's kind of like a metaphor for the sage, because the plaster is our saboteurs, right? Like our essence when we're, I hope I'm not getting too esoteric, because we're not always talking about this when I'm coaching, by the way. I'm doing business coaching.
No, but I'm glad you brought this story up.
The slowing down piece is kind of like that reconnection with that essence and that kind of that intuitive intelligence that we suppress, especially in American or Western culture, because we're so rational, we're so driven by the rational. Mm-hmm. Right? In fact, one of the saboteurs is called the hyper-rational. Hyper-rationals have great rational brains. They're great problem solvers. But they're so good at problem solving that when there's an issue that doesn't call for problem solving, like in a relationship issue, which isn't always resolved with problem solving, right? Sometimes you just need empathy, right? But the hyperachievers, the person who has the hyperachiever saboteur is going to lean into that strength in the wrong moment and try to fix everything rationally, even the non-rational situation, right? And that's when it becomes a saboteur, right? All saboteurs come from our strengths. So the golden Buddha version of the rational, the sage would be the sage rational, and that would be an ability to solve problems through rational means when that is what's called for,
Right.
but not leaning on it when that's not what's called for. And we all have our saboteurs. Some of us are pleasers, and we lean too hard into the empathy, right? And we don't set up boundaries, right? Some of us are sticklers. Some of us are hyper vigilant, and we're really good at making sure, like if we have a hyper vigilant saboteur, our strength may be keeping an eye out and not being taken advantage of, and protecting ourselves and our friends, and that can create a very great sense of security. But when we're doing it, when we're seeing threats everywhere, it becomes our saboteur. Right. Sometimes you gotta trust.
I think that, I mean, just that metaphor of it too, and I connected is just of like everybody's got that beauty within them, and then they have that ugliness that's out there that they're not realizing it, and that's what people are seeing. And so that's what's covering up. And then once they kind of get in deep, and then that starts to glow and shine, it's just a great metaphor. And one of the exercises, and at first I thought it was weird, it was get a picture of yourself when you were younger. And I don't want to go too deep with
Go for it.
But and I think you were the one that gave me or talked about it, and I put it on my phone. It's a picture of me in 4th grade, and the practice, or it was because of being a hyperachiever, you kind of get on yourself, and there's other things that were my saboteurs, and of getting down on myself. And it was looking at that person as a kid before all this stuff happens, and before they turn out that way of
before you feel like you have to achieve to earn love, or to be loved, or whatnot, before you feel like you're not worthy unless you achieve something or perform.
And so looking at that too, and I have it on my phone all the time, it's like, would I be so down on that kid, or would I look at him? So even if you have that person in your life that's just terrible person, or whatever is made in that way, that's covered up that essence, but when you see him as that kid before all that stuff happens, and especially as being as an elementary teacher, you'd see him in a whole different light. And so it's almost like you're looking at yourself in a different light and being like, why am I so hard on that little kid right there? And so it was a very powerful exercise.
Well, I mean, what's coming up as you talk about that is the relationship between that and conflict resolution, because to take it back to kind of we're in this very what I think is practical but somewhat esoteric kind of conversation right now, but like when you see the sage in the other, when you seek it, right, it's much harder to be in conflict with that person, right? Like the essence, the essence is there, but what happens is we're so kind of in tune, we're seeing the plaster, not the gold, and we're fighting against the plaster instead of trying to get out the gold, right? And so there's defensiveness here, there's defensiveness there. We become defensive, they become defensive. And so one of the practices, for example, that I might take someone through who I'm coaching, and if they're in a conflict, is that really just they're speaking on behalf of the other person in the conflict, not to say that they're right the other person's right and then my client is wrong. That's not the purpose of it. But just to kind of expand awareness, right? Like, so they use a word, they use the construction, I feel ... because, and they're speaking on behalf of the other person, right? And just that moment is a moment which primes them for better ideas and better solutions on how to go about repairing this relationship, you know?
Yeah.
Whether it's a coworker or an employee or whatnot. So,
Yeah.
And that goes right back to this idea of the golden Buddha.
And I want to read, because a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, you know, the esoteric part of it, and you know, Stephen, who we talked about, he talked about being really successful in his yoga, and getting so many followers because he really wasn't so that, and he was able to connect with them because people are like, oh man, now this sounds like we're getting, and this program really isn't that. It really, it will allow you to connect to that, but it really is more of things that people can use, simple things where it's not this crazy stuff,
Yeah.
but of just bringing your attention to different tools that you can use in your life. And
Well, it has scientific backing. I mean, there's a
right.
ton of science behind it. It's a neuroscientific fact that when we are feeling under threat, right, when we are feeling negative emotions, we are using a different part of our brain than when we are seeing opportunities and gifts and feeling joy and creativity. Because when we feel a threat, we become very narrow because our mission is to kind of shake off that threat, right? And it can be useful if there's a tiger coming out of the bushes, you know, because we want to be very single-minded. Yeah. But it's not useful to live in that, right? To live in that sense of threat and to use that to drive our behavior and action and point of view. You know?
And I would say that the main thing, and we've stated this a few times, is being mindful of and catching those things throughout the day. So, you know, one of the aspects that I loved about it and using technology with today was that, and everybody's connected to their cell phone, was that it would give you alert. Yeah. You know, hey, it's time to do your exercises. And the wonderful thing was about it is that, and I think so many people do when you know, there's a great book called Atomic Habits, which talks about, you know, most people, when they want to do a habit, they're like, oh, I need to do an hour of working out. No, you start with a minute.
Yeah.
Shit, if you can't do a damn minute, you know, where it's at least you're doing a minute and it's consistent. And then from there, and so what that app did and what the program did was allow you to be, all right, a minute. But if I want to, which, you know, I found myself, hey, all right, let me do the 15-minute focus. And it's not this of where I'm sitting there going, it's not that. It's of being mindful of in the moment. And what they do is a lot of stuff that they do use in yoga and meditation of your 5 senses, because your 5 senses are a wonderful way to bring you to the here and now. And like I was just stating of, oh, look at that beautiful sunset. Oh, so I'm not in my mind, I'm here and now. I'm looking at the details of the tree in front of me or the car in front of me. Or, you know, because I remember driving and listening to the thing, to. Which
Careful.
I was just going to say, because the one time, don't do that.
Yeah.
Just out of experience. Or rubbing my fingers together. Mm-hmm. Stephen also talked about, like, when he has his the yoga members or the students basically relaxing and feeling the warmth of the sun, smelling the ocean. And so when you do that, it really does bring you to here and now. And then it's that practice of living in the moment, of being mindful of where you're at now, which then allows you to, which like we talked about, to be able to work on yourself and get creative, like you were talking about, of bringing that sage out of this.
And I don't even, I don't think I completed my thought because I started talking about science, and then I got in. And what happens is, like, you have certain habits. We're talking about habits, right? This is called the daily reps. Well, we have these ingrained habits, and not all of them are productive for us. But what happens is the neurons in our brain, right? They have choices, right? When you get a signal from outside or from somewhere, and then you respond, and eventually we start responding in a specific direction, right? And we keep responding, and physically our brains and our nervous system starts creating that, making that the easier pathway to go, right? So if I'm always going this way, so what these do, these little self-command reps or PQ reps that we're talking about, is they stop that quick, oh, I'm going always to the right, I'm going always to the right, I'm going always to the right. It stops it. So then you can start taking a different direction. And then as you build that new pathway up, it's easier to fire in this new direction than it was before, when it was like a super highway.
And there's actual science, and Andy, you've probably heard this, where whenever there's a stimulus response. So I want to use my father because when he really struggled with his PTSD from the Vietnam War was when he retired, and then he had that time to think. And I remember him going through all the therapy and stuff, and I asked him, I said, Dad, what are the tools that they're giving you to help you, And he said, the things you tried to tell me a long time ago. And I was like, what? And he's like, meditation and breathing. And I was like, really? And I remember he had this keychain, and it said, stop, breathe, think. So I know one of the things that set him off was helicopters, because he heard of, so for 50 some years, right, my father's and every time you do that stimulus response, the same one, it literally, when they go into your brain and they can see this, it builds up these strong neural nets. It makes it harder to break.
Yeah.
And so somebody was doing that so long, where my dad would just go off or something, of taking that time, that mind of being in the moment and catching it through your breath, because that literally calms you down, brings you, instead of being in your head of, okay, I'm in Vietnam, oh no, I'm here and now. And then slowly breaking those things which we have built. And of course, like you just said, the more, and there's the studies that show, the more and more and more and more and more you do that, the harder and longer it is to break. But it is possible to do that.
Yeah, it's possible, like, until you are 80, 90. I mean, it's possible.
Which is
it's
great.
Amazing. Yeah.
Great. So
Amazing.
it's to hear you talk about that is just is mind blowing. And the daily habits that you were talking about, and one thing that just kind of caught my mind was that Muslim religion is that they have those 3 times during the day that they pray. And the reason I think that is because instead of getting caught up in the day, they know, okay, which is being, what is my purpose in life? What are the major things that I need to, instead of worrying about this, okay, I'm catching myself.
Right.
And that's what the program did for me, was like, it was like, I'm also going to say it, like in the morning, in the middle of the day, and then at night.
Yeah.
And reflecting on it, which was a great thing of, like, how did you do?
It's ancient. I mean, it's new and it's ancient. Ultimately, these are ancient practices, right? They're useful. That's why they've been around.
Absolutely. And so and we want to let people know that they are a little bit deeper than what most people do think, but they're not. It's scientific proven. They're not these crazy, dreamy type, where people might be thinking about this. They're reasonable practices that are not. They're scientifically backed, and they work. He's training athletes. I can be a living example. Everybody that that we did, Andy, I think everybody said it was worth it.
Yeah, oh yeah, every single person. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
everybody did. It was valuable, and so hopefully people can realize that benefit of it, because I mean, guys, honest truth, it's changed my life for the already, where I know that I will continue and keep my attention on it. And the wonderful thing about it is that it does use modern technology to make it a lot easier to
yeah.
access and to keep your attention on it. And so, you know, one thing that, you know, when you talk about this show is really, we call it daily reps, because, you know, bringing somebody like Andy on the show who, you know, he stated about, and we ask all of our guests are, because everybody does, you know, and you would think, you know, somebody like me, Andy, and the successful people that we've had on there, you know, oh, they're just born with this, or they don't go through hard times. And, you know, Andy stated and then, you know, the hard time that he went through and what he did to overcome that. And, you know, what are the things that inspire you and that motivate you, you know, that keep you kind of chugging and moving forward?
Yeah.
You know, and I kind of gave a little bit of the things that I do, but, you know, what are the daily things that you do, or that, you know, that really keep you in your attention going? And
Focus.
yes.
Yeah. Well, I think one of them is what we've been talking about, which are I stop consistently throughout the day. You're funny. Um, you know, I definitely, I'm stopping, you know, multiple times a day, and I don't just use an app. Like, you know, whenever I think, um, whenever I sense there's a moment to kind of be present, I try to be present. So that's a constant habit. It's something I'll never be 100% on, and I'm always going to be growing into. Um, so that's a habit. And then, you know, every morning when I wake up, I get very intentional. I have a process where I'm thinking about, okay, what do I want to build? What is my goal here? And what is the purpose of today? And what am I grateful for? So I think gratitude is a nice way to kind of access your sage as well, right? And then in the evening, um, I try, not always successful, to map out my next day with just a couple of items, you know, the most important. So maybe 4 items on my little list, and make a commitment to that day, commitment to take care of those items that day, making sure that the list isn't that big, because if the list gets too big, I got too many saboteurs are gonna jump out as soon as I wake up in the morning, right? So when I see that list, so I try to keep the saboteurs at bay with a smaller, more intentional list, and which I make the night before, and then I can sleep well. So does that answer your question? I know we're talking about
Yeah.
habits, but that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what we want, because it is those small daily habits, and you know, to hear Andy to reinforce of which every one of our guests already have talked about, and I've talked about, as important in my life of being mindful that the program that we talked about that Andy offers will help you build that. And every single person that we've had on here already has stated that they are mindful of what they're doing, of catching their mistakes that they made. And then the one thing that Andy did talk about that we haven't heard yet was the of being grateful. And if you go on that, like I was stating before, of looking at very successful people, and they'll bring that up so much, of really taking the time to reflect of, and I believe it was Aaron that we had on the show, the championship bodybuilder, of being grateful. And he was stated that, you know, when he would go to the gym, he would think of people in wheelchairs that are, you know, can't do that. And that was something that really motivated him. And for him to say that, and then kind of set me
Yeah.
back, and then hearing Andy talk about it as well, you know, because it really is a powerful thing of being grateful for what you have, and your gifts that you have as an individual.
just having a body that works is
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
amazing. You
And
know?
and that's the point of the video is because, and I state that you know, you've heard me talk about this, Andy, and I'm so passionate. It's like health is that foundation. And if you're sickly and all that, and there's so many things that you want to accomplish in life, it really, you know, that's like a big part of, you know, how can you go after what you want, and how can you have a clear mind when you're, you know, you're not taking care of yourself. And we know the aspects of if we're not putting the right foods in our body and how that affects our hormones and our emotions. And, you know, that's a hard thing to keep in check if we're not even, if that's already has an effect on us. You know, it's literally the building blocks of successful people. And so for yourself, Andy, you know, I know that through that program, it's stated about being, you know, physically active and working out and stuff like that. You know, what's your routines for taking care of your health? Like, what do you
Oh,
do?
okay.
Is there a specific food that, you know, that you noticed that has kind of changed?
Yeah.
We talked
No,
about a little bit about celery juice.
I mean, yeah, I could. This is a area that I love actually to think about, but it's kind of I've never really talked about it publicly, but you know, years ago I encountered Ayurveda, and I follow some of those principles. I follow them pretty consistently. I pay attention to the time of the year, but what that is just acknowledging that each of us has certain a certain body type and certain tendencies, and acknowledging the fact that we literally, it's not just a terminology or an expression. We are what we eat. Like the food that we put into our body becomes our body, right? And so paying attention to what kind of body we have and what kind of food our body needs is very important. So I've been practicing that very consistently, informally. You know, I'm an informal student, never done anything professionally, but I
But
follow that.
you've noticed the difference in the impact that
Yeah,
it has.
and to be honest, lately, lately we've started taking a lot more herbs. My wife and I, ashwagandha herb. There's this. Uh, I forget the names of the other ones. I wish I could.
Well,
Shivatri, or something like that. And they've just had a tremendous. They just make me feel so good. I'm just it's a little powder.
right.
So just, yeah, be mindful
I think
about.
ashwanda root, or I think that might be.
Yeah,
Well,
the ashwagandha is the
yeah.
one. Yeah.
And so what I'll do is we'll dig this out at Andy in a bit. I'll make sure that I link that for you. But yeah, so that you've noticed by
Yeah.
taking this a difference in the effect that it has had a good effect.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and just modifying what I eat based on the season. So during the summertime, I know that I can overheat, so I eat a lot of melon, and it just so happens that's when melon is available. So I think that just the earth is really amazing. And then in the fall, when there's lots of wind, you get blown around, and you can start feeling agitated. Um, it's squash season, which is very earthy, kind of weighted vegetable. So in the
Oh,
fall, I'm eating a lot of squash, things like
I,
that.
I love you because you're hitting on, and I'm going to bring a guest on here to really talk about the impacts of eating seasonal um, vegetables, and how that, and like you talked about, the healthiest people that they found in the world are literally the ones that have the most bacteria, microorganisms growing in their gut, that literally eat based on what is given to them, you know. So yeah, and eating a variety of it. And we'll have somebody in, we'll talk a little bit more in depth
Cool.
about it. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, Andy, because I think and I've already had a bunch of people comment me and talk about it. My cousin brought it up of what, and I wanted to direct this question to you
Sure.
specifically. Advice to people that have a hard time, that just hate working out, that don't like are having a hard time with that health thing, that just don't, they have a hard time eating healthy, they hate it, they hate working out. Is there any type of advice that you could give them?
There are a couple, I suppose.
Give us a couple.
Yeah, the first would be, why not hire a coach? Having somebody there to help you kind of understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with a fitness program, a physical fitness. And I'm not a health coach, so don't hire me for that. But here we go. Yeah. Hire somebody who's gonna keep you accountable. So that's number one. I think everybody should have an impartial coach, someone who isn't invested emotionally, someone who wants what you want for you, not someone who's invested emotionally and wants something for themselves, which is the case with many personal relationships, right?
Right.
And then so I would say that, and then maybe what I try to do, which is successful sometimes, but pause just before your workout and just kind of remember, like, think about what you want to do or what you're here for. It's like, take that pause, take a moment.
Yeah.
To be like, to get into your intention.
Man, you just hit the nail on the head. I do that with all my clients, myself. It really started from yoga, which will make you do that with your breath. But especially when I started working with a professional athlete, and we would breathe, and I would say, I want you to, because what I noticed with myself of when I'm 100% invested in my yoga session, in my workouts. So in the gym, and I talked a little bit about this in previous shows, of the results you get when you're fully 100% in and not thinking about your day, but you're like, how that muscle feels, how this movement is, my breathing, what my intent is of doing that. Because when you do set that and you realize, and you take that few seconds of, I'm doing this for me. I'm doing this for my health. I want to be better myself. And then doing that, and actually a lot of yoga practices literally will break you up and stop you in the middle, kind of like the program that we just talked about, your middle of bringing you back to why you feel it is important, because it's motivating of itself. And then when you do that, it's like it's crazy the results that you get from that. And I remember the first time I connected with that, because I'd go through workouts and I trained hard, but when I was like fully invested in where where I walked out of that gym and I was like, man, I would say out of that 90 minutes, 70 minutes and when I did that, holy cow, holy shit, the results. And so it's awesome to hear you say that. And we'll end on that note. Another thing I want to before we go though, Andy, any advice for anybody that's thinking about getting into life coaching or going the route that you?
Yeah. The advice: if you're going to be a coach, have a coach, right? Make sure that you're being coached too. Make sure that, because you'll learn from it, you'll understand the impact. So go out, find a coach. I know many, so I'm happy to refer anybody to anyone who's really.
And I remember you working with and telling me that you've had mentors that you work with, and you actively sought them out. And so I remember when you were first getting into this and you were talking to me about successful life coaches, and you sought them out and got.
Yeah, you find someone who you want to kind of coach, who you want to learn from and be coached by them, right? It's very much like it's very ancient way of learning, master teacher, right? It's and that's what's great about the industry. It's not just about going to a classroom and I love being in classrooms personally, but it's not just about going to a classroom and taking notes and learning the knowledge. It's, you know, in the coaching world, you should be getting coached by someone who's a better coach than you, always. Yeah.
Awesome advice, Andy. Again, you can reach Andy at manifestara.com. That's MANIFESTARA
Hey. Yeah.
.com. And we're going to link him. And guys, I'll get you, if you have any questions about that, you know, please feel free to comment on any things that we talked about. I really feel like I could sit here and talk with Andy easily for another.
Yeah, we could use a lot of time, but I don't know if everybody else would have so much patience with us.
Right.
But
But
we could be
hey,
here forever.
honestly, Andy, I feel that you've dropped us a ton of knowledge the entire time, bud. And I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you helping me, you taking the time out of your busy day to talk with me and to share a little bit of that knowledge that you do have to offer. And I recommend him. I can't, and I'm more than willing to go in depths about and talking about kind of how Andy pulled me out of there and stuff. I know I kind of was a little bit vague about that, but you know, he really did help me a ton. And I'm super grateful that he's a friend of mine, that he did take the time to help me and that he's a part of my life. Andy, thank you so much, bud. Always great to talk to you, man.
Yeah.
I'm sure that later on, as we keep going and running through people, man, I want to bring you on because I truly do feel that you do have a lot more and some very valuable advice and knowledge to give us, and I appreciate it, bud.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you, Eric. It's always
All
a
right,
pleasure.
Andy.
Always, man.
All
Take
right,
care.
man. Thank you so much, bud.
All right. See
Take
ya.
care, Andy.
You just hit stop recording. Just hit the record button, I think.